You're listening to the 4-Phase Cycle Podcast with your hosts, Dr. Alex and Megan of ZESTY Ginger. If you're looking to naturally balance hormones and learn how to work with your body instead of against it, you've definitely come to the right place. As a duo of an integrative MD and a functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner and best friends, we use the 4 phases of the female cycle in combination with functional lab work and mindset practices to transform the lives of the women we work with.
We also have a whole lot of fun along the way. If you're new around here, it's best to start with season 1 before jumping around and plan to roll up your sleeves. Showing up for ourselves and enjoying our lives is what good health is all about. Just a quick reminder though, this information is not intended to diagnose, manage, or treat disease. Always consult with your doctor before making changes.
Hello, it is Alex here. I'm here for day 27 of our Flowing with Your Cycle series. So excited to have you here. We're almost done, and I love that you have stuck with me and that you are kind of sharing what is going on with us, and it just is so satisfying for me. Thank you. I really appreciate it. So if you've sent anything in, I thank you very much. So day 27, what are we talking about today? So inclusion is going to be the name of the game today. And inclusion is a part of this integration process that we are going through in phase 4. And kind of the closer we get to the start of phase 1 as our period starts, you can feel that there's a natural transition from this integration step as it guides and informs the next cycle, right? So hopefully that makes sense, because that's kind of been the game all around. And here we want to find opportunities to smooth out the artificial distinctions that we make, right? People are like, it's phase 3, it stands alone. It's phase 4, that means this is the end of the cycle. I'm going to start a next one. That is certainly true, and there's utility and times for creating distinctions like that, especially as when we do teaching inside mastermind groups and speaking for other businesses or providers or entrepreneurs, right? We do a lot of that. And when we do that, at the initial step, yes, it helps to have more clear delineations, but as you live it, you really start to see just how much it really is a flow. That's why people refer to it as that, and it does have that feel to it. It's like a river that doesn't stop moving. This is not something that we can hold back on, right? It's just life and time flowing, and we flow with it. Therefore, as this conversation continues about integrating the new and the old into our lives, there is a focus on what we choose to include. Now, this has the potential to be a barn-burning day, okay? And I'm borrowing that phrase. I learned it from Jim Fortin. But it's essentially one of those times that your brain can understand a concept in a way that blows up some artificial walls all over the place. So I'm going to preface that. Now, you've heard some of this discussion on the podcast because I've alluded to it and talked about it. However, today with the way that we're going to talk about inclusion as part of the integrative process, there's a lot of potential here for just seeing how much our life and the different aspects of ourselves are linked up and inform what actually happens, right? So what do I mean by inclusion as part of the integration? Many times we do have the split between different parts of ourselves and what we kind of artificially delineate between actions that we take at certain times or certain places of our lives and the things that we think, right? And so inclusion, this part is much more experiential as well. in terms of your expression of what it looks like. So let me kind of back up and do a little intro for inclusion and what I mean by that. Inclusion means that we honor and take note and really give relevance to all of the different components of the things that we think, feel, and do. This means that many of us at this part of the cycle are using the concept of exclusion as a way to either explain things or rationalize things. And much of that attempt of excluding aspects of ourselves really tends to reinforce and cause again and again and again and again the different parts of ourselves that end up being at war. Right. So it's like you want the new thing, but you don't follow through on the action and it's not sustainable. Or you say you want one thing and you act a different way. Right. In my understanding currently of how this happens, it is because there are different parts of ourselves that we have essentially kept very separate, and depending on which one is active at any given time, that will drive our choices, our actions, our thoughts. And that is how we then see the discrepancy where we look back and we're like, how did this even happen? I said I wanted this, and then I was the one that went and did that. Like, how does that even make sense, right? And that is what I'm talking about, inclusion. As we begin to see everything as an integrated whole in our life and as a meaningful part of ourselves, that means that we can make choices on what we actually choose to include as an activity or as a thought as part of that, right? We are welcoming things in, and in doing so, we then shift our focus to those things that we want and less about the things that we don't want. And as that happens, those parts, they know what they're going for, right? They know what they're including. They know that they're being accepted by you as part of the whole of who you are. And therefore, those other things that cause us to be at war with ourselves then are not reinforced and therefore don't come up as strongly in our lives or our experience, and we feel like we make progress. So that's why this part is so key, right? It really becomes the final step as we bring the new and the old together and say, what am I really willing to include in all of me? Then from that whole, more whole standpoint, the next phase is then launched. And you can see how over the course of a year, 12 to 13 cycles is going to be a really massive change. That's how people that do this kind of work, or really any sort of integration work, no matter what avenue you pick, they, from the outside, it looks like their life up levels at such a rapid pace, and people are like, how do you do that? But this is essentially how that happens. So inclusion is there's different layers, like I was talking about. There's inclusion of all of who we are, with the understanding that sometimes the different parts of us can compete, right? So this is the part of you that wants to build a massively successful business, and the part of you that is protecting you from judgment and harm by making sure that you're scared to go live or scared to be on that podcast. It is also doing its job, right? And so you not putting yourself out there is then at odds with that massively successful business that you would like to have and make a huge impact in the world. And so that is what I mean by inclusion from that part's perspective. There are the different parts of you that we can honor and hear them out and say, I hear you on the protection. I also would like to do things in a way that is safe for me, And yet, when you begin to integrate the part that's scared, you then get to make the choice around which activities or which aspects of yourself you are going to express that in, right? Because then once you say, oh, I want to feel safe, well, what does the concept of safety mean as a standalone, truly a part of you without it necessarily having to be, oh, the way that I do things is by playing small and hiding and not putting myself out there, right? The actual desire of the part is included in you because that's obviously very important. All of us want to be protected and safe and seen and all of these things. So there's no aspect of that that needs to go, right? But we can say, if I'm including this protection part, what does that look like in a way that is not at odds with the bigger goals and the aspirations that I have for my whole beingness? Right? One of the most powerful ways to begin to access these different parts of ourselves and really simmer it all down to the heart of what the part is getting at is journaling and free writing. Okay. Sometimes people process things verbally. I'm one of those. That's part of the reasons I'm long winded. And for here, then sometimes talking with someone who is also doing this work. That's why inside our Healthy Hormones Group program and Health Transformation Accelerator, we have people buddy up. So that sometimes that working through process either brings up questions that they can help you work through, or just even the act of talking. Once you talk from the position of that part, then you really get to experience, like, those are actually the words coming out of my mouth that represent that part. And now I can see, what is that part really trying to do for me, right? It is always doing something that is attempting to benefit you, right? We create parts because we are essentially saying, here's what I want, and this is how I figured out one successful strategy of it. And that's really why you hear this common theme of, we can let our successful strategies from the past continue to be inside our toolkit, but we can actually question and challenge the concept of, is that the only one? Is that the only way that we can be protected and safe, right? Because a lot of people in that example that I use, we work with a lot of entrepreneurs and women who are wanting to impact the world in a really big way. They have lots of other support that they could have at their disposal, and that they actually a lot of times do have. But this protective part, it's very locked into continuing to do that. And so if you don't have the awareness of it, you don't make the decisions around it, right? So that's why writing it out and actually speaking from a part works. In the beginning, there's lots of parts and they jump around. As you do the work and allowing them to speak, and really then honing in on what is the benefit that they're providing and how can I do that, the integration part tends to go smaller and smaller and smaller parts left. So for me, I'm at the place where there's kind of the big fragments that are left of the parts. There's only a couple of them. And in the beginning, there was a ton and they all had different voices, right? So that's where free writing, you can either hop between them, or once I got down to kind of a couple different parts that were really predominantly left, I have a journal that has a different section for each part, and depending on what's going on, I actually will journal from that place and work through it. So it's really, really cool to do it that way. Now, okay, the second part of inclusion is our attention to things. Because a lot of where the fragmentation happens is that we say we want something, and then we think, feel, plan for, and even sometimes take action against the very thing that we say we want. That happens really commonly when our goals are big and there's a question of how you're going to get there, especially if you've failed in the past. This is really common in weight loss and business and relationships, right? You have a history and therefore you keep sort of using that history as evidence of why it's difficult, and that fragmentation really builds. However, when we take a step back and say, well, those are kind of the different parts expressing themselves, the next layer up is then, well, how can I watch myself play out the different parts? So let's say you really want a partner, right? You are feeling like a partner is really something that would bring happiness and joy and alignment into your life. You crave that kind of connection. You know it about yourself that a meaningful relationship is something that positively augments your life and allows you to create from that place. Not everyone is like this, so maybe this is not um, an example that you can relate to. And if that's the case, switch it over to the kind of job or business you want to have, or the health you want to have, or whatever. But let's say, just for example, you want a relationship. We often are talking about how we would like a relationship, and our desire is that we have one. And yet, we can start to notice, which is, day 27 is an amazing day to do that, how often we are engaging in thoughts, emotions, and behaviors that are actually addressing the fact that we do not have one. Okay, this is kind of where it gets a little mind bendy, right? Because we say, I want one, and then we actually do things like, oh, I'm so, that didn't work out and this didn't work out. So those are thoughts that we have. Then we feel into the emotion, I'm so frustrated, this never works out for me. Right? So now we've looped in the emotions, and then it can actually go to actions. This doesn't work, I'm deleting these dating apps. Do you see how that works? So it actually, you say it over here, and then the rest of the train is actually driving along the I don't have it one, right? This is the concept of momentum in the trains is a good one, or a semi truck if you want to see it that way. Sometimes we've had a long time, that semi truck of not having a relationship has been barreling down that hill, right? And it's caught a certain amount of momentum. It does sometimes take a while for that to slow down and for us to begin to love on and allow the expression of ourselves to really voice our concerns. It kind of slows that part down. That's why I think giving them a voice is so powerful as part of the integration process. Because if you can really truly sit with, like, I'm so frustrated that it hasn't worked out, let me debrief from that, and then in that expression look at it, say, this is the past, I honor it, and I will move my attention to what I actually want and reinforcing that, then you're essentially slowing down the semi at the bottom of the hill, and off it goes into another direction, and we get to choose that. But let's not beat ourselves up if we find ourselves in the momentum, right? This is where that awareness and the inclusion is saying it's a part that is doing that. It is not the entirety of who you are as a being. And that's why it's not a guilt and shame thing. It truly is, okay, how can I respect what job this part is doing? Acknowledge that this is important to me, and also choose to put one foot in front of the other in the new direction, knowing that it may take me some time to release that momentum and pick up momentum in the new direction. So this is where it really comes down to watching yourself do things. And this is going to, because oftentimes it's what we're actually thinking and feeling and less about the action that happens. I would say most of the action ends up being like, 10%. I'm making up on the percentage, but in terms of, it's very small, but we can talk with our girlfriends about like, oh, I really want a relationship. I really want this. This is really what I want. And then the rest of the day be like, I'm so frustrated. I'm so really sad. I miss this person. I messed that up, right? There's just all of that feedback that reinforces the not havingness of it. And at first, you're just going to note that because this is not denying that it's happening. We're not trying to stuff it under the rug. Because if we stuff it under the rug, we all know how that goes. Eventually, it's going to come back out. And it's going to come back out at a moment where likely something happens and we're already a little emotionally labile or really involved in that part of ourselves, and then all of a sudden everything's going to come out flying under that rug, and that's when people have the full-blown meltdown. And the reason I know that is because I totally tried to do this. Right? So this is my attempt at, I know how much this stinks, and I really do not want people to go through it for as long as I did. I was very stubborn about this, and I really had to just be like, why am I reinforcing? And I did figure out that was all a protective mechanism. It was all part of, I can't plan for this good thing happening. Like it was the same thing with chronic pain. Chronic pain was like, I'm in pain now. That's the momentum I have going. There's a whole part of me that says I've tried a whole bunch of stuff and none of it has ever worked, right? And then Megan and I discovered all of this new stuff that you see from us and the different parts of ourselves and the different layers and the components of like our emotional, physical, mental, spiritual bodies. And with that, then I had a new framework to work in, but that does not mean that my brain immediately was like, oh, great, yeah, no problem, right? It fought me on it because it wanted to protect me from the experience of saying, if you believe in it and then you're let down again, you're going to feel crushed. Therefore, I'm going to protect you by making sure that you also do things that are in the opposite direction just to make sure. But then really I was spending more time just making sure that I was set up to continue having pain than I actually did for not being in pain. This is where I think the brain melty, barn burny stuff happens because we really are like, if you can really sit with it, almost everyone we have ever come across has components of this going on in their field in a part of their life. And with health, this is huge, right? So as you consider what you're including as the whole part of you, it becomes a moment by moment decision making process. Is this something I want to include in the wholeness of me? Or, you know, we're not excluding things. We're just saying if I don't consciously include it, it can fall away. Right? There's actually no pushing away. That's why I'm not talking about denial or trying to pretend like it's not happening. It's just, what do I want to focus on? And what we focus on then is what gets reinforced, and therefore the momentum builds and things get easier. So from that standpoint, with the parts, just bring an awareness into it. Keep it light. One of the questions or one of the words that I love for this is curiosity. This is not I'm going to buckle down and see all the stuff I'm focusing on. It's like you want to move to another city, but you keep applying jobs in your old city because you are worried that you won't find any in the new place, right? We can just watch that. And then curiosity is not guilt and shame and kind of beating yourself up. Curiosity then goes, what is driving this? The action of, I keep applying for jobs in the old city and I keep, answering their emails and all of that stuff, when really I want to move forward. And then when you're in a place of curiosity, that does not mean that you're like, oh, I hate this, I'm going to stop that. Because sometimes you're like, yeah, I want to have for myself some semblance of a backup plan, right? But it's a very different energy to say, I have a backup plan because I really don't think this other thing will pan out. Or I have a backup plan And now I set that up, I release it, knowing that that is my safety net, and I still focus my attention and predominantly take action and reinforce the new thing, right? A lot of the same actual actions, which is why I think the actions end up being a small proportion of the stuff, but they're driven by all of the other emotions and thoughts and beliefs that we then reinforce. And that is why we can calmly and rationally take some action if you want a backup plan and kind of have some things in place, and then back to go to the 80-90% that looks like, how am I planning for this in my head? What am I thinking? Right? And this is where kind of moving ahead and think, how can we even start to see that as a possibility? So I started, when I was dealing with pain, I started planning for what would travel look like for me if I didn't have to worry about being in pain. Because I would do all of this stuff before my trip. I would do certain things while I was in the airport or in the car traveling. And then when I got someplace, I set up a whole new thing, right? So all of that took up a lot of time and space. And really the planning for it and the thinking about it was much more, and then here the action took over. So for me, it kind of looked like, yeah, I could set up and look for a chiropractor at the place that I land, because my neck and my head kind of tend to act up, right? I can still make that choice. And then I can also reinforce these ideas of, how can I make it super fun? What would not in pain Alex be doing instead of all of that stuff, right? So instead of doing the stretches at the airport and turning on my Healy and whatever, it's more like, ooh, how can I plan for podcasts and do the stuff, right? The things that light me up. So I literally was planning for and making choices around that new way of being. And that's what that activity looked like. Then my focus was on, what do I want to say in the podcast that really lights me up, that feels really good for me? Do I know that I have a chiropractor available to help me when I land? Yeah, cool. But I don't need to do all of that stuff all the time to reinforce it. So over time it will shift, and the better I felt, the less I accounted for it, and I did more and more onto the newness rather than the oldness. And that's why you have cycle after cycle to keep moving that along in whatever pace and shape and form that you want to. So thank you for sticking with me on this kind of more complex topic, but I hope that you are seeing how powerful this can really be as you go through this cycle after cycle after cycle. And now with this setup, approach the new phase one. Holy cow, you are just a completely different person, which is what we're going to talk about on day 28. So I'm going to stop here, but I hope that you are super proud, because this is so cool. I hope that even if you haven't done this and you don't have that evidence yet, you can see how powerful this can end up being. All right, I will catch you on the next one. I'm sending you lots of love. Talk soon.
Thanks for coming out to hang with us on the podcast. It is our goal to transform the way women are treated in healthcare. And we need your help. We need your help to get the word out. We have a lofty goal of 1 million downloads. And we know that as this podcast grows, we're going to be able to reach more women, get more amazing speakers for you, and bring the most cutting-edge information.
If you found these podclasses helpful, please take a moment to text 5 women you know the link to the series. We appreciate your help so much. Can't wait to see you next time.